adventure, which is a separate story, ended rather disastrously, but memorably so.
Memorably so. But let me turn to you for a minute, Steve. So where are you? So we're talking then about how D&D was shaping up, 1971 into 72. Blackmore things are happening in the Twin Cities. Where are you, 1971 and 1972?
I'm playing war games. I'm writing Don Ilian, who ran Third Millennium.
Yep.
And
where geographically, first of all, were you to start with?
I just moved from Las Vegas, where I used to play 1914 and some other games that took way too long. And had moved to Idaho. And all they had there was people playing chess, which I liked, mind you. I went, to some national tournaments and stuff, but and so I'm mostly corresponding with old friends. I'm in high school. I get to graduate I graduated when I was 17 and started college in 73.
And you went to college at whereabouts?
I went to college at BYU. I probably...
Sure, for BYU?
I probably should not have turned down the full scholarships to MIT and Stanford. BYU didn't treat me as well, but, I was a kid and I was looking forward to the girls.
The girls at BYU, I might not have seen that coming. But when you got to BYU, then if you got there in 73?
Yes.
So D&D comes out in 1974. And when did you first hear about Dungeons and Dragons?
I sat down next to Sandy Peterson and Brian Stout, and they had the rules out in class. They're reading them instead of the textbook, and I asked if I could borrow one of the books. And I didn't know them before that. But Sandy's really generous. And he said, sure. And so I borrowed Men and Monsters, which is probably not the best book to start with, but...
And Sandy Peterson, did he go on to do anything of note for the benefit of our audience here? Just people might not know, so.
Yeah. Greg Stafford needed someone to move to, and Sandy's a great replacement for me. And so I introduced him to Sandy. Mm-hmm. And he went on and did Call of Cthulhu. We play tested Stormbringer.
Yeah.
I play tested a lot of stuff. I tended to break things.
Yes.
Not intentionally. I just kind of played like I would if I was living there, and which meant I min-maxed everything intuitively.
Right.
And then they had to change the rules.
But that's a very important thing I want to get to here, because one of the contrasts I love about having these two guys up here is that you're someone who started tinkering with the D&D rules immediately.
Yeah.
And, of course, Mike would become part of the establishment. We're going to get to that in a second. He joined TSR, as I mentioned, quite early on. But even before you came on board, you were already writing to TSR with ideas.
Yeah. And, it was a small world, and I was used to corresponding with people. And so I just wrote Gary and asked some questions.
And that the world was like that then, right?
It was, absolutely.
Where, the wargaming community, the people that, remember D&D did not market itself as a role-playing game in its original edition. It just said it was rules for fantastic medieval war games campaigns, right? That wargaming community was small enough. If you subscribe to the right fan magazines or fanzines, Mike alluded to the International Federation of Wargaming, the
Castle
IFW.
and Crusade Society.
Yep, and of course, you have Castle and Crusade Society, Mike's own Aerodrome for the Fight in the Sky Society. And you had a set of zines as well that you contributed to. You were in Great Plains Game Players newsletter a bit, and Jim Lurvy's zine.
That was kind of accidental. I just...
Yeah.
But alarms and excursions,
of course,
the Wild Hunt, and things like that.
And so, we may think it would be audacious, maybe even presumptive, to write into TSR and be like, hey, I've got some ideas. But tell me about what you can recall of the first thing you sent to TSR and how you felt sending that in.
I don't remember the first thing. But Gary was really big on alternate Earths.
Okay.
And so we talked about stuff out of bestiaries. And of all things, there is a single bestiary that has purple worms as they are in the rules. And there's no other source for them, it turns out. It attributes them to Brazil. They have stones in their heads that witches fight them over so they can fly. And I've only found that source once. It turns out Gary and I had both read it. And so we're talking about, purple worms and whether or not to have witches and adding good and evil to law and chaos. And it was like, okay. And then Gary took a bunch of stuff I'd written and made me a contributing editor to one of the issues of Strategic Review and tossed all the stuff on good and evil into that issue.
And then in 1975, and this is almost when Mike joins the company, so we're going to get back to Mike on this in a second, Dave Arneson was preparing that first Blackmore supplement. And it's a supplement in which you were credited. If you look at the first page of it, there's a thanks to Steve Marsh there for sending in some aquatic monsters.
Yeah, when I originally tried to design a campaign before I had D&D rules, which sure made it easier, to say the least, because I didn't know about miniatures. And so I was trying to do it with board game templates, which is really hard. I don't recommend it. I had a multi-planar background for it. It was a post-apocalyptic, two planes collide over a third and you have a big mess. And so but underwater encounters would be fun. And so I did a bunch of monsters and some small rules and some magic items and sent them into Gary. I thought he might like them. Mm-hmm. And next thing I know, they show up in Blackmore.
Now, in Blackmore, of course, the famous thing that appears in the Blackmore supplement is the Temple of the Frog, which did indeed have the Brothers of the Swamp, right, and this kind of general aquatic environment to it. Mike, any recollections from you about that?
Just playing a little bit, but nothing I can add that's real significant about that. But at that time, we were all trying so many different things. It was just a bubbling cauldron of ideas, and the fact that Steve could send things in and it would get published. I mean, that's a testimony to how open that atmosphere was, so to speak, at that time.
Yeah, but by that time, by the end of 1975, it had become clear that D&D was kind of going places. Now, when we say that, maybe 4,000 copies of the game had sold by the end of 1975, around the time that Blackmore came out. So it was still really circulating mainly in the wargaming community, a little bit in the science fiction fandom community that was starting to embrace it. But it got to the point where they needed some staff. Like there was enough product coming out and there was enough correspondence and questions coming in that they started looking for people with management experience who could come on board and be a TSR. So I understand, Mike, that you were hired around this time, early in '76.
Yes, I had been staying in contact with Gary Gygax throughout this period and corresponding and so on, like a lot of other people, because Gary was an inveterate correspondent and wrote a lot of letters to a lot of people, and he was in the diplomacy community and otherwise. And he said, things are kind of getting off the ground here in Lake Geneva, and we'd like to find somebody who knows games that has some management experience. And since you were a manager at the Ground Round restaurant, you've got some management experience. Well, at TSR, I didn't have to supervise any waitresses or cooks, but it passed for experience in Gary's eyes, and so he invited me to come to work there. The interesting thing is I had graduated from Macalester College in St. Paul, and I grew up in St. Paul. I stayed in St. Paul to go to college. Macalester's a great school, but that allowed me to stay in the Twin Cities gaming scene for another 4 or 5 years, which was invaluable in terms of memories and experience. And so he invited me to come to work in Lake Geneva. I had worked my way up as a manager trainee and assistant manager with the Ground Round up to $205 a week. And Gary said, if you come to Lake Geneva, we'll pay you $110 a week, but we'll give you some stock in the company, which if this enterprise gets off the ground, that stock could be worth something in the future. And absolutely it was. And that's what passed for a startup in those days. So that's what brought me there. It was Monday, March 15th, 1976, when I worked my first day there. And interestingly, I wrote a letter that day to my friend Harry Holman, and he gave me this letter a couple years ago. It says, here I am at TSR in Lake Geneva. It's my first day. I went down in the basement and saw a bunch of Fight in the Skies games in the boxes and stuff like that. So this letter is kind of a priceless memory of a real, cornerstone moment in my life coming to Lake Geneva. So that's how Gary invited me. So I came and did, in those days I was a 7th employee. We did a lot of general thing. Everybody wore a number of hats and did a number of things. I started out kind of as general manager, and then I moved after a number of months, or after a little while, into the game side of things as a games and rules editor, and then eventually VP and et cetera. So.
Eventually, yeah, you were VP quite quickly, if I recall, and then
Yeah.
general manager, then executive vice president. You did end up wearing quite a few hats there.
Yeah, and I loved being on the creative side as a games and rules editor, and of course, a couple of landmark works that I produced were as editor of the hardbound books, the Monster Manual, the Player's Handbook, and the Dungeon Master's Guide. Also volunteered to write, and did write the B1 module, and so on. And then when TSR started to want to vertically integrate, they wanted to take everything in-house. The management at TSR was very reticent to do licensing deals. They want to do everything themselves. Why should we have Minifigs or Grenadier make miniatures and trade on our reputation? We should be doing our own miniatures. So they want to do a manufacturing division and to try to cut costs. So in theory, vertical integration was good, but it was not well handled. They asked me to be the head of the manufacturing division. I actually turned it down first, and then Gary took me aside and said, Mike, you're somebody we trust. We need you to do this. I need you to go from the creative side to the manufacturing side. And I didn't have any manufacturing experience, but for the good of the company, I did it. So, and that's kind of a checkered story, which is very well told in John's book, The Game Wizards, by the way. It didn't have a happy ending, but...
It didn't have a happy ending for most, but as you pointed out, the stock that you were initially issued that was worth $100 a share then, by the time you exited, I believe it was $3,000 a share?
At the peak, yeah.
Yeah, so it's true. You had one of the happier endings,
I really
think, of
do.
anybody that is discussed in
Absolutely.
my book, Game Wizards, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. The TSR stock went from $100 up to $2,000, up to $3,000, and then they wanted to buy me out, and they wouldn't really tell me why do they want to buy me out, because I had about maybe 5, 6, 7% of the company at that point. Because do they want to buy me out because Milton Bradley's going to buy them, or Parker Brothers is going to buy them, or whatever. So I said, I'd sell some of my stock. No, we want it all. This is Brian Bloom saying this. I said, all right, well, I want some premium. So they paid me $3,075 a share, which was the highest price anybody ever got for shares of TSR stock.
And I know this is an OD&D panel, and so I want to get back to basic. You mentioned your work on B1, and I want to talk about, obviously, the expert set as well, because I consider that all in the remit of OD&D. But I think it is also worth mentioning, and is this just the cosmos favors you? Because, of course, once you exited, when you got bought out in 1983, just let everybody know here what happened then in your life.
There was a series of cutbacks. Things really peaked in 1982. That was kind of the high water mark. And in 1983, things started to go on the downslide. And it was pretty obvious to everyone that the air was coming out of the balloon, so to speak. And there was a series of layoffs in the spring, and then there was a second set of layoffs in July. And again, I was pretty fortunate. The day that they said, we're cutting staff further the second time around, and I was in the second batch. Alan Hammock, who's going to be on the next panel.
He's on the next panel, if you're at the next panel.
Alan Hammock came up to me and said, Mike, aren't you a little upset and bitter? You were one of the first people who came to TSR at Gary's invitation, et cetera, and you gave 7 years of your life to this place. And I said, and this is such a cliche, but it was absolutely true. I said, well, Alan, sometimes they say one door closes and another door opens, and that's exactly what happened to me. I happened to go a few weeks later, pick up a copy of the Wall Street Journal. There was an ad for commodity futures trader in Chicago, and I had proposed doing a game at TSR, which never went anywhere, but I was interested in futures trading. I got the job, and that was a group called the Turtles, and there have been books written about that. So lightning struck me twice. I had a ringside seat for the whole D&D phenomenon, and this commodity trading opportunity came along. So I made out as well or better than anybody else in the whole TSR. So,
Well deserved.
I'm a lucky guy, and I'll be the first one to say that. So.
Yeah. But right around the time you came on board then, March of 1976, they were putting the finishing touches on Eldritch Wizardry, and another book in which Mr. Marsh here is credited.
Yes.
So explain to people here, psionics. Getting that feedback again. Feedback? Okay. Psionics has a bit of a controversial reputation among D&D fans. Explain a bit of the messiness of how the psionic system in Eldritch Wizardry came together.
Okay. First thing you need to understand is that they used to have what Tim Cass calls the basket of, and we can't put it over the air, where everything that just kind of showed up would show up in the design department without provenance. Now, I had submitted a character class that had what turned into psionic powers based on Indian mystics. Because I'd taken a class, philosophy class, and I liked the idea. I thought, we need to have kind of broaden this out. And then Gary really liked the idea of psionics. And there was another group called Divines, and they couldn't quite make a character class out of it. They had attack and defense modes. And so he put those and my mystic class in the bucket of stuff and gave it to Tim Kask and said, make it work. And bless Tim's heart, you can imagine what it's like to get a bunch of stuff mixed together. And I actually typed this. A lot of the stuff I submitted was handwritten. And told, make it work. And I want psionics at the end of the day. And so Tim made it into the psionics. And it's a miracle it works at all.
But again, to me, it's just so fascinating because it shows how it took a village, right, to make the original Dungeons and Dragons. And I hear a lot of stories from people like Tim Kask about precisely that process. He would always the euphemism he would always use is it came in over the transom. Right, that something would just get slipped above the door, and it would end up there. Who knows who sent it in, and they just have to integrate it and make it happen. But let's go on to basic. We're going to talk about basic a little bit. We've probably got 15 minutes more here for us to really dive into things. Let's start actually with talking about B1.
Okay.
And because would you describe yourself as an avid D&D player in the 1970s?
Not at all.
Not at all.
I was the very first cleric, but am I an avid D&D player or have I ever been? No, but working as an editor and working with all that material and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the hardbound books and stuff like that, I was probably a good choice for that because I could look at it, I wasn't too close to it. And so I could look at it from an outside perspective and what Gary presented, was it understandable, did it make sense, and that sort of thing. So I think that's what I brought to the table was the fact that I was not an avid D&D player.
I mean, I would go further and say that because this was going to ship in the Holmes basic set, right, initially, it was really one of the first things that told you how to play.
And that was the whole purpose of it.
Yeah, in a way that, certainly the original D&D books had very scant information. I mean, they had plenty of tables to tell you how to make characters. Here's how you should make a dungeon. Here's how many hit dice this monster has, but not a lot of this is what you're supposed to go do, right? Yeah. And the descriptions that you wrote in B1 of if you're the referee, you describe the situation to the players, and the players will propose actions that they're going to take, and you tell them this is
backstory.
Yeah, you create the entire kind of general idea, as they would say in wargaming, of the scenario that they're going to be exploring. But I mean, that text, there wasn't text like that in the published D&D books before that. And of course, when you compare it to B2, which quickly replaced B1 in the basic sets, which is another story that, I don't know. We could talk about that. We might have.
Let's talk a little bit.
Yeah, we're going to come back to him too on this, but just that whole passages that you had in B1 about how you play the game. I really feel like B2 just kind of borrowed. I'll put it that way. It borrowed that. Borrowed substantially from your outsider perspective on D&D.
Well, when the idea came, when the Holmes Basic set came out, it was obvious that there was a need for additional material and explain how to use this and how to imagine the game and how to be a dungeon master. So I raised my hand and said, I'd like to take a shot at this, and they they being the Bloom brothers and Gary kind of mulled it back and forth. And they said, all right, you can take a shot at it. And I said, well, I'll do it on my own time. They promised me a 2% royalty. And I worked on it for quite a number of weeks. And I thought, what do you need to know if you've never seen this before? And so that's the approach that I took. And I created the backstory. I selected the name Quasqueton for this mystical stronghold that the fledgling adventurers are going to go and explore. And the interesting thing is that nobody before internet search engines knew that Quasqueton was a real place in Iowa. So I digress, but in 2017 when Goodman Games republished B1 and B2, Tim Wadzinski from Goodman took the B1, B2 to Quasqueton, Iowa, to the town museum and said, do you realize that your town name is part of Dungeons & Dragons lore? And no, what are you talking about? Well, the woman who runs the museum was tickled pink, and her son, is probably in his 30s at least, were just kind of taken by this. And so Tim came back and said, oh, they were delighted in Quasqueton about their town name and stuff. And I said, well, we should do something fun on that. So I created bumper stickers at my own expense. Yellow, it says Quasqueton, former home of Rogan and Zeligar. And just for fun. And I printed 2,200 of them, and last November 18th, I think it was, we went to Quasqueton, Tim Wadzinski from Goodman and I called up Harold Johnson, who was part of TSR history, who was my roommate for many time. I said, this is on a Thursday, this is on Saturday, we're going to be there. I said, Harold, you want to go to Quasqueton? And right away he says, the one in Iowa? I said, yeah, we're going there on Saturday. I got a bunch of bumper stickers, going to have a presentation. We put out press releases to the Waterloo and Cedar Rapids and Dubuque media and stuff, and we didn't know how many people were going to show up. We had about 45 or 50 people showed up. I spoke for 5 minutes, Harold spoke for 5. Tim Wadzinski did. We passed out bumper stickers, everybody was happy. And I asked one of this woman, I said, how are you, what's the story, how did you come today? She goes, oh, my grandmother reads the Cedar Rapids Gazette. She knows I play D&D. She said, oh, there's going to be a Saturday D&D event in Quasqueton, so here I am. So it was really cool. So I brought 540 of those bumper stickers that went into the VIG swag bags, so you may see them around.
Yeah, but I believe you gave me one at Gamehole that year.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, and you can go to Quasqueton, Iowa, and get one free one at the museum. Or yeah. I don't have any with me today, but nonetheless, I can get you one if you. Well, they last. So anyway.
So again, I want to do another study in contrast. So you got a 2% royalty then on B1. Initially.
When the time came,
yes.
They were very reticent to pay it.
Oh, we'll get back to that.
Okay.
Well, maybe that's a good follow through. So, Steve, tell me about your experience contributing monsters to Blackmore, psionics concepts to Eldritch Wizardry. What compensation did you receive from TSR for all of this?
Money.
Did you?
I was promised a royalty on Saga, the minigame I did.
Oh yeah, that was much later. I'm really just asking about the original D&D book.
No, nothing.
Yes, nothing. Were you given free copies?
Yes, I got some free copies. I got one free copy.
Yep, you want one free copy.
Yeah, I got a copy of what I did.
And yet, despite this, fast forward to 1980, you and Gary, as I said, have been corresponding quite a bit, and Gary was always eager to bring you on board. Once you were pursuing your law degree, and Steve went on to practice law for some time. You're now retired, I believe.
I'm in recovery, yes.
He's in recovery from being a lawyer. But he eventually twisted your arm to come in and work for TSR. It was really for the summer, right?
Yes.
Of 1980.
I agreed to come in for the summer. He said he'd take care of housing. He got distracted. Norm Stick picked me up. And I walked in and they said, hey, we got this extra work nobody wants to do. Would you like to do it? I said, sure.
What is it? What is the extra work you were?
First, I had to read the Judges Guild approvals. And sometimes they had stuff like, we kill all the men after raping them, which is...
Yeah. We don't need to go there.
We're lawful good. And we wear no armor or clothes because we have magic. But we're low level. And it's like the whole world is going to hunt these people down to take their magic items away. And they can't be lawful good, not like that.
It's got to be fixed.
Yeah, that had to be fixed. Somebody had to keep an eye on the Judges Guild. Those of you who are familiar with their contemporary reputation may know what I'm talking about. But
Anyway, so I did some approval, non-approval. It's like, I don't have to approve this, do I? It's like, no. Okay, well, I just, ugh. Anyway, but some of it was better. Some of it was good. And then they had the expert set stuff. What became the expert set. They had someone to write it, and everybody was busy with stuff that was important, which is embarrassing to admit that I'm best known for something that everybody considered unimportant.
do people here consider the expert set of BX unimportant? No, boo, boo, boo.
Anyway, and they gave me the bucket of stuff. And
So now you have the bucket. The bucket that Tim Kask once had, you now have.
And they had some real terrible stuff in there. All elves live in trees. And I go, do I have to use this? And Lord said, heavens forbid. That's why it's in the bucket. And so I didn't use any of it. And typed it all up. They didn't like, I wanted to have intelligent hairy rhinos. Because I like the idea of heavy cavalry. And
It's a wargamer joke. It's a wargamer joke.
and sorry, but they made them. They decided they couldn't be intelligent. So after Errol Otis drew a picture of one sitting in an armchair, smoking a pipe, I said that's not what I meant. But anyway, and they said, and they took a couple of things. Said, oh no, this needs to go in the companion book we're going to do later. I said okay, and I'm going to actually get the companion book out December 1st. It'll be on Drive-Thru RPG for free. We'll pay what you want, but that's basically free these days.
Yeah, you've had a lot of projects that have kind of floated around, working on the planes, for example. This is something you're working with on with Gary in the 80s.
Yeah, we did a bunch of stuff for the planes, and of all things, Judges Guild was going to publish it, and then they went under. And then Mike Gunderloy was working on it, and his house burned down. And that's what the originals are. I had one copy, and those went off in an auction. So I've had a lot of stuff that's been kind of out there and kind of disappeared into the fires. I had Star Strands.
Yep.
And when Gary told me that it had been burned with the stuff in his office, I thought he was being figurative. Later I discovered it was literal, that Lorraine had actually burned stuff, which was a real surprise to me. But Star Strands, I'm assuming Peter recovers, or I was supposed to run it for Peter this Saturday.
Well, if he just tested positive this morning, you may not be running it for him this
Yeah.
Saturday.
But anyway, so I've got a lot of stuff that's been reconstructed, and all the planar, all the planar stuff I've gotten redone. Because I did the original structure for the planes, and then Gary decided to build off that because he wanted to move them into a near Earth setting rather than just more abstract.
And this would be the cosmology that initially appeared at the back of the player's handbook and related dragon articles and things like that. Yeah. You were a prime mover of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I've got it reconfigured so that the structure is a little bit more obvious.
Better late than never, right?
Yeah.
It's only 40 years late. Come on.
Well, but with 40 years of perspective, and this is the amazing thing about doing a series of panels like this, looking back at this game 50 years later.
And it's fun.
Yeah, well, it is
to
fun.
revisit, yeah.
Like, what do you feel now? And you both went on to be accomplished people, a commodities trader, a lawyer. Like, you had a bigger career than just that you did some work on TSR and D&D early on. How do you feel about it now when you look back on that? Was that like the best time of your life? Was that was it like the way most people feel about college, that it was a time of like freedom and everything else? Or for each of you, I'll start with you, Steve. How do you feel about the work you did for TSR now?
It was fun.
Yeah.
They paid me $7 an hour. And I was supposed to come back at $7.50, but that was too much for the Blooms. And so they sent me a letter telling me that the job offer was withdrawn, and they'd never really made it, and please don't bother them again. And I thought, $7.50 an hour, I didn't know it was that much, but it was. But no, it was fun. And it was a small world, and there were a lot of very likable people. I mean, look at Mike Carr.
Okay.
He is a likable guy.
He's likable.
Thank you.
And there were a lot of people that were just pleasant and likable and enjoyable and accessible. You know, I met Greg Stafford at a convention. He's manning a booth. And not only that, it wasn't crowded.
Yeah, I'm sure the Chaosium is glad to hear that. But Mike, what about you, sir?
In my case, I recognized it was a great opportunity. As much as I enjoyed the restaurant business, working 6 days a week was no fun at all, having Tuesdays off. So, and I was single, and I had no reason not to go to Lake Geneva, even at virtually a 50% pay cut. So it was tremendous fun. Everything was kind of a bubbling cauldron of material and projects and that sort of thing. And it was just, if you're a gamer, we all know as gamers, there's just, when you dive into that stuff, it's A, interesting, and B, can be very fun as well as entertaining. And then if you create something that people enjoy, I mean, then it just redounds to you. I mean, I wrote the B1 module in 1979, and people are still congratulating me today about it and saying how this, you know, how much fun they had with it. A guy came up to me and says, "I probably run your module 100 times." And I looked at him like 100 times, and the guy next to him says, "Oh yeah, he's run it 100 times. I've run it 30 times." So, I mean, that project has legs. So.
Project has legs. And what projects are you guys working on now that might have legs? Anything here that you'd like to plug, or you mentioned something of yours that's coming out? Where can they get it? What is it?
Well, it's the continuation of Basic and Expert set, and taking characters to higher levels. And Basic had dungeons, Expert had the wilderness, and the Companion will have the plains.
Mm.
And then we've got a scenario set that goes with it, and it's basically set in what's an outdoor dungeon that opens up into plains. It's been around since I was on a panel at DundraCon, I think.
Mm.
We're supposed to show how do you run multiple sets of characters at the same time. And so we talked about it in the panel, then we did it afterwards and showed people how to play it. And that'll be City of the Revenant, and that should be out December 1st too. But it's obvious it makes a lot of money, for me at least. But it's fun and it's free. And I have to finish hiking the Continental Divide Trail by the end of October, so I can have November to finish my part of the writing.
We had to have him airlifted here, actually, to get him off the trail, just to make this appearance. The helicopter will be waiting for you, actually, outside. On Georgia Street, it's a little walk, but...
It's close, actually. I was between Glacier National Park and the Bob Marshall Wilderness, which doesn't allow any mechanical stuff.
I see, okay. We'll have you dog sledded.
There was also a train involved.
And Mr. Carr?
I'm hoping to prepare a 8th edition of the Fight in the Skies Dawn Patrol game eventually, but my latest project is a rhyming book for children called Great Big Girls and Boys Love Great Big Toys, and I'm going to have a Kickstarter campaign later this fall. I'm going to guess around Thanksgiving and so on, and it's a rhyming book for young readers ages 4 to 9, and we're going to do a hardcover sale retail library edition in a horizontal format for sale and for libraries and stuff. But once we reach stretch goals, we're going to do a half-size version, which will be soft cover, and we're going to give away those literally by the thousands for Toys for Tots, Ronald McDonald House, Dolly Parton's Reading Imagination Library, and that sort of thing. So that's what I'm behind. And since I'm not on social media, it's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle, but you've heard about it now, so spread the word.
Yes. Well, and I know, Mike, you sometimes do mass emails to people you know are on social media, including people like Peter and myself that are telling us about these things, and we may relay some of this information across to people. So I guess my last question for you, and we've only got 3 minutes left here, are there any stories from this period I haven't asked about, or it's anything that stands out that you think would be entertaining for the audience that has come here to understand, just to put all this in perspective? Anything? I know I'm putting you on the spot, so.
Well, I told my Quasqueton story.
You told the Quasqueton story. That story's pretty good.
Lawrence Schick had great taste in music.
Lawrence Schick had great taste. Lawrence Schick was the vice president of the design department at around the time that Steve came on to work on the expert set. He's now over doing, what is he? He's at Larian now, isn't he? Or is he
He got addicted to Ireland.
yeah, he is in Ireland, but I'm just thinking I know for years he was the lore master of Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
You know, and he did some work on Baldur's Gate 3, which is a quite popular game that came out recently. Just a wee bit.
And Zeb Cook was always so gentlemanly.
Well, we're going to have Zeb here at, what time is that? That, I guess, is 1 o'clock.
In a few hours.
Yeah, so a few hours we'll have Zeb Cook and Steve Winter here. And any gossip you have about them before they get here that we can share now.
One of the terrible things about working with Zeb and Tom Oldvay and Lawrence Schick is there was a paucity of gossip.
Paucity of gossip? That seems impossible.
They were just really pleasant, and they worked a lot.
Yeah, they were real gentlemen and still are, and
Yeah.
full of imagination and just delightful people.
But it's terrible because you don't have any juicy gossip to share about these people. Other than, you know, at TSR when you ran a game, the game master brought the snack.
Oh, no, obviously. Game Master doesn't bring the snacks.
Well, I mean, that's one of the big changes in modern
All right. For years, we have been trying to find the demarcation point between old school and new school gaming. I believe, finally, thanks to Steve Marsh,
Watershed.
we have a boundary we can draw.
Now it can be told.
And I believe, unfortunately, with that, this is time for us to move along. As we heard, we're doing many panels. I'm doing 4 of these today, I guess 5 of these today. So thank you so much for coming. I wish we had time for questions and things like that, but our 2 distinguished actual historical figures will be outside in the hallway for as long as they can stand it to take any of your questions. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks for being here to celebrate the history of D&D, and thanks most of all to these guys for what they did.
And thanks to Peter for setting it up.
Thanks to John.
And John for running it.
All right, we're done. We're done.